Their financial situation became more precarious when in January 1805 Mr. Austen died suddenly. The family's only source of income was gone. There was no pension or house for a clergyman's widow. At the age of 29, Jane was now entirely dependent on the goodwill of her brothers.
I went to Bath for my father's funeral and to arrange matters for our dear trio of women. I was confident that Edward would give them £100 a year. James, Frank and I put in another £50 each. Well, they had only to move into slightly smaller, furnished lodgings, easily managed by one maid, and spend their summers making visits to family and friends. We were providing fully enough to ensure that my mother and sisters would be quite as rich as ever.
With little money and no settled home, they were often obliged to stay at Godmersham in Kent, home of brother Edward, who had now inherited the great estate of his adoptive parents. He had a brood of children, and Jane was invited to look after them. However, she was often seen as the poor relation.
She was not so refined as she ought to have been, considering her talent. The Austens were not rich, and the people around them with whom they chiefly mixed were not at all high-bred, or, in short, anything more than mediocre. Both the aunts were brought up in the most complete ignorance of the world and its ways, and if it had not been for Papa's marriage which brought them into Kent, they would have been, though not less clever and agreeable in themselves, very much below par as to good society and its ways.
Jane resented relying on the charity of her relatives, but she tried to make the best of a bad situation.
We must not all expect to be individually lucky. The luck of one member of a family is luck to all.
It took some time for Edward to share his good luck, but eventually he made it possible for the Austen women to return to their beloved Hampshire. He offered them a charming cottage on his other estate in the sleepy village of Chawton.
Jane was so delighted with their new house that she wrote a poem in praise of it. Our Chawton home, how much we find already in it to our mind, and how convinced that when complete it will all other houses beat, that ever have been made or mended, with rooms concise or rooms distended.
The effect on Jane of settling in a permanent home was dramatic. She was able to take up her pen in the old way. A black cloud lifted and her imagination was restored. Almost at once, she began to write again.
Cassandra took on all the domestic responsibilities of the house, so that Jane could find a daily routine for her work.
She wrote upon small sheets of paper that could be easily put away or covered with a piece of blotting paper. She was careful that her occupation was never suspected by servants or visitors. There was between the front door and the offices a swing door that creaked when it was opened. But she objected to having this little inconvenience remedied, as it gave her notice that anyone was coming.
Her books were her darling children.
I am never too busy to think of Sense and Sensibility. I can no more forget it than a mother can forget a sucking child.
Jane saw other women burdened with too many babes, and she rejoiced in her own freedom. Poor animals, she called our brothers' wives, as well she might. 3 of them died in childbirth. And soon she saw her children go out into the world and prosper.
At last, Henry found a publisher, and Sense and Sensibility was advertised on the 31st of October, 1811, as a new novel by a lady.
Jane would allow nothing more. She'd been no lady if the secret were out. Another woman writer said, "I'd rather exhibit as a rope dancer than see my name printed on the title page."
Sense and Sensibility became the talk of London dinner tables. Fashionable people said that nothing had been published for years to compare with it.
Pride and Prejudice followed in 1813 to even greater acclaim, and Jane took intense pleasure in her success and the money it brought her.
I have now written myself into £250, which only makes me long for more.
With her newfound wealth, she sent some dress material to Cassandra, writing,
"Remember that it is a present. Do not refuse me. I am very rich."
Within the family, we were greatly proud of Jane's success. I gave her my opinion of each of her characters. She surpassed herself with Mr. Collins. When the finished copies of Pride and Prejudice arrived at Chawton, she invited me to read with her. The neighbours who made our audience had no idea she was the author.
No one deserved success more. The playwright Sheridan recommended Pride and Prejudice to me as one of the best things he'd ever read. Another gentleman assured me that it was much too clever to be the work of a woman.
Henry heard Pride and Prejudice warmly praised in Scotland, and what did he do in the warmth of his brotherly vanity and love? But immediately tell them who wrote it. The secret had spread so far that when my next book appeared, I could not even attempt to tell lies about it. I resolved to make all the money, rather than all the mystery, I could of it.
Now the secret was out, Jane attracted an important, if unpopular, admirer, the Prince Regent. Like her countrymen, she detested this drunken and philandering monarch, and was not pleased to be invited to dedicate her next novel, Emma, to His Royal Highness.
I resisted the idea, until it was pointed out that a royal suggestion is a royal command.